Long before the world learned to measure time with seconds and schedules, there were nights when darkness arrived quietly, settling over towns like a heavy blanket, and people learned to listen closely to the sound of their own breathing. You might have lived in such a time when the air smelled of wood smoke and damp earth, and the streets were narrow enough that neighbors could hear one another cough through the walls. This was a world without alarms or glowing screens. A world where survival depended on habit, patience, and the smallest daily choices, often made without knowing how important they truly were. If you had lived during the years when the Black Plague drifted slowly across continents, you would not have known it by that name. To you, it would have arrived as rumors first. A traveler passing through would speak of villages gone silent, of doors left open, of bells ringing for the dead until no one was left to ring them. At first, these stories would feel distant, like something happening beyond the edge of your own life. You might have nodded politely, then returned to sweeping the floor, kneading bread, or mending a torn sleeve by candlelight. Your survival would not begin with heroic acts or secret knowledge. It would begin with routine, with waking early as the sun crept through a thin window, with washing your hands in cold water drawn from a well, not because you feared sickness, but because clean hands made work easier. Many who survived did so simply because they lived quieter lives, away from crowded market centers, or because they followed habits taught by parents who had survived earlier hardships. In the mornings, you might have stepped outside to feel the weather before deciding what kind of day it would be. Cool air meant slower movement, fewer flies, and less decay. Warm air meant caution, even if you did not yet understand why. You might have chosen to open your windows just a little, allowing air to move through your home, carrying away stale smells. Fresh air, though not understood scientifically, often made people feel better, and feelings guided survival more than facts ever did. Food would play a quiet but important role. Those who survived often ate simply. Thick soups simmered for hours, made from vegetables pulled from small gardens, grains stored in dry places, and occasional bits of meat preserved with salt. Boiling food made it safer, though no one would have explained it that way. It simply tasted better and lasted longer. Water too mattered. Drawing from deeper wells instead of surface streams could make the difference between sickness and strength, though again, it would feel like common sense rather than strategy. As weeks passed, you might have noticed changes. Fewer voices in the street. Shops closing earlier. A smell in the air that was hard to name, not exactly rot, but heaviness. You would learn to stay indoors more, not out of fear, but because there was less reason to go out. Crowds thinned naturally. The market, once full of shouting and laughter, became quiet. Survival sometimes came from absence rather than action. You might have learned to watch people carefully. Not out of suspicion, but out of awareness. A neighbor who suddenly moved slowly, who avoided eye contact, who wrapped themselves tightly, even in warm weather. Instinct would tell you to keep distance, though you would not have known why distance mattered. Some survived simply because they listened to discomfort and stepped back when something felt wrong. Inside your home, life would slow. You might spend long hours sitting near a fire, repairing tools, sharpening knives, or twisting rope. These small tasks kept hands busy and minds calm. Calm mattered more than people realized. Panic drew people into crowds, into churches packed with breath and sweat and fear. Those who stayed home, who prayed quietly, or not at all, who focused on the present moment, often endured while others did not. Sleep would come earlier in those days. Darkness ruled the schedule. Candles were precious, and you would not waste them. You might lie down fully clothed, wrapped in blankets that smelled of wool and smoke, listening to the sounds of night. Rats scurrying, wind brushing against shutters. Somewhere far off, a bell tolling again, slower now. If illness came close, perhaps to the house next door, survival would depend on restraint. The urge to help was strong, but so was the instinct to protect one's own household. Some survivors helped from a distance, leaving food outside doors, avoiding touch. It felt cruel, but it saved lives. Kindness did not always require closeness. Time would blur. Days without names. Weeks marked only by how full the food stores were or how quiet the town had become. You might stop counting the dead, not because you did not care, but because counting became too heavy. Instead, you would count small victories. A meal eaten without nausea, a morning without fever, a night slept through. Your body would teach you things. To rest when tired, to eat slowly, to drink warm liquids. Many survivors lived because they did not push themselves beyond necessity. Work was steady but gentle. Exhaustion weakened people, even if they did not know it. Those who conserved energy often lasted longer. Clothing mattered too. Clean garments, washed when possible, aired in sunlight. Sunlight felt cleansing. People noticed that things left in the sun smelled better, felt safer. You might hang blankets outside on clear days, letting light touch them for hours. Again, survival came through observation, not explanation. As seasons changed, so did danger. Winter slowed the plague's reach. Cold kept people indoors, but it also slowed decay in insects. Fires burned more often, drying the air. You might feel safer without knowing why. Spring would bring caution again. Warmth returned, along with movement, trade, and risk. If you survived long enough, you would notice something else. Silence inside yourself. Fear softened into acceptance. Each day became enough on its own. This mindset protected many people. Stress weakened the body. Calm preserved it. Survivors were not always stronger. They were often quieter. Beyond the plague itself, survival meant adapting to a changed world. Fields left untended, homes abandoned. You might learn to grow your own food more carefully, saving seeds, rotating crops, paying attention to soil. Knowledge passed quietly between survivors, through gestures rather than words. You would learn which paths to avoid, which towns were safest, which inns welcomed travelers without crowding them. You might choose to walk rather than ride with others, to travel alone instead of in groups. Solitude became safety. At night, lying down again, you would listen to your own breath, steady and warm. Each breath would be a small promise. Not of the future, but of the present moment continuing just a little longer. Survival was never guaranteed, but it was built minute by minute, choice by choice. And as sleep came, heavy and slow, you would not think of history or catastrophe. You would think of the fire cooling, of tomorrow's bread, of the quiet strength of simply being here. Morning would arrive without announcement, a pale light pressing softly against closed eyelids. You would wake not because of urgency, but because rest had finished its work. The air inside the room would feel cool, carrying the faint scent of ash from the fire that had burned low during the night. For a moment, you would lie still, listening. Silence was information now. No coughing nearby meant another small success. You would rise slowly, careful not to rush the body. Sudden movement brought dizziness, and dizziness led to weakness. Survivors learned to respect the body's pace. You might wrap a shawl around your shoulders before stepping outside, where dew clung to the ground and the world felt temporarily clean. Early mornings were safest. Fewer people, fewer disturbances, fewer chances for trouble. If you kept animals, you would tend to them first. Chickens, goats, perhaps a single cow. Animals often sensed illness before humans did. A restless animal, refusing food, could warn you of danger long before symptoms appeared in people. You might notice which animals stayed healthy and which did not, and quietly adjust your habits around them. Clean bedding for animals mattered as much as clean bedding for yourself. Water would need to be drawn again. You would lower the bucket carefully, listening for the sound of it meeting the surface far below. Deep wells were valued now more than ever. Surface water, once convenient, had become something to avoid. You would not know about contamination or bacteria, but you would know that some water made people sick, and some did not. Knowledge did not need names to be useful. As the day unfolded, you would choose tasks that kept you close to home. Repairing a fence, mending clothing, grinding grain, these tasks were repetitive, almost meditative. Repetition calmed the mind, and a calm mind helped the body remain strong. Many who survived did so because their lives became smaller, more contained, less exposed. From time to time, you might hear distant voices or footsteps. You would pause and listen rather than rush to greet anyone. Visitors were no longer welcomed without thought. Doors stayed closed. Conversations happened through windows, at a distance. You might exchange news quietly, learning which roads were still safe, which households had fallen ill. Information moved slowly, but it moved. If someone asked for help, you would weigh compassion carefully. You might leave bread on a stone outside your door at dusk, when no one was watching. You might lower a bucket of water from an upper window rather than opening the door. These small adaptations allowed kindness without exposure. Many survivors learned this balance, even if it weighed heavily on the heart. Inside, you would keep your space as orderly as possible. Disorder invited pests, and pests brought danger. You would sweep floors regularly, dispose of waste far from living areas, and store food in sealed containers if you had them. These habits, born from practicality rather than fear, reduced risk more than people realized at the time. As the plague continued its slow movement across the land, you might notice that those who traveled often fell ill more frequently. Constant movement meant constant exposure. Those who stayed rooted, who lived within a narrow radius, fared better. Survival favored stillness. You might resist the urge to flee unless absolutely necessary, understanding instinctively that running often led straight into trouble. When illness did appear within your own household, survival would depend on separation. The sick would be given their own space, as much as possible. Shared bowls and cups would be avoided. Bedding would be changed and aired outside whenever strength allowed. These actions were exhausting, but they worked often enough to be remembered. You would learn to watch for early signs: fever, swelling, unusual fatigue. If you felt them yourself, you would rest immediately, not later. Not after one more task. Immediate rest saved lives. Many who survived did so because they listened to the body as first warnings rather than dismissing them. Food would be adjusted as well. Lighter meals, warm broths, less heavy bread when digestion felt slow. People noticed that the sick tolerated simple foods better. Herbs, when available, were added not because they cured disease, but because they soothed the body. Comfort itself became a form of medicine. As evening approached, you would close shutters early. Not only for warmth, but for peace of mind. The world outside had become unpredictable. Inside, you could control lights, sound, and air. Control reduced anxiety, and reduced anxiety strengthened resilience. Candles would be lit sparingly. Fire was watched carefully. Fires were dangerous now, with fewer people available to help if something went wrong. Everything was done with caution, with deliberation. Life slowed to a careful rhythm, like walking across thin ice. At night, sleep might come in waves. You would drift off, wake briefly, then rest again. Dreams might be strange, filled with empty streets and half-remembered faces. You would not try to interpret them. Dreams were simply the mind sorting through the day. Over time, you would notice that fear changed shape. It became quieter, less sharp. It settled into routine, like an old ache. You learned to live alongside it without letting it control you. This emotional adaptation was as important as any physical precaution. When seasons turned again, and the worst began to pass in some areas, survivors like you would emerge slowly, cautiously. You would not rush back into crowds. You would observe first. Survival had taught patience. Fields would need tending. Buildings would need repair. New routines would form. The world would not return to what it was, but you would adapt to what it had become. Adaptation, more than strength or intelligence, was the true skill of survival. And each night, as you lay down once more, you would breathe deeply, steadily, alive, present, not triumphant, but enduring. Survival was not a victory shout. It was a quiet continuation. Days would begin to blend together, not in confusion, but in calm repetition. You would stop marking time by events and begin marking it by light. The pale glow of morning, the steady brightness of midday, the soft fading toward evening. This rhythm became reliable when nothing else was. Survivors learned to trust cycles rather than promises. You might notice how sound had changed. Birds returned cautiously to places where human noise had faded. Their calls filled the spaces once occupied by carts and voices. At first, the quiet felt unsettling. Then it became comforting. Silence meant safety. Silence meant distance from danger. Your body, having adjusted to slower living, would feel different. Stronger in some ways, lighter in others. Hunger came and went, but you learned not to fear it. Eating when food was available mattered more than eating often. Those who survived were not those who ate the most, but those who wasted the least. You would grow careful with waste. Nothing was thrown away without thought. Bones became broth. Cloth scraps became patches. Ash from the fire became useful for cleaning. Survival sharpened awareness. Every object had value, every resource a purpose. Sometimes, memories of before would surface. Laughter in crowded rooms, festivals, music echoing through streets. These memories might bring sadness, but also resolve. You had lived through change before, and you were living through it now. Memory did not weaken you. It reminded you of what endurance could protect. You might receive news of distant regions where the sickness had burned through quickly and then faded. Places where fewer people lived closely together fared better. These stories reinforced habits you already followed. Space, air, patience. Survival was often about reducing contact rather than increasing effort. If you had children in your care, you would keep them close, not confined, but guided. They would learn by watching you. How you washed hands before meals. How you avoided touching your face unnecessarily. How you rested when tired. These lessons would stay with them longer than any spoken warning. Illness would still appear from time to time. Not every case could be avoided, but you would notice patterns. Those who rested early recovered more often. Those who ignored symptoms did not. These observations would quietly shape future behavior long after the plague itself faded. You would learn to value warmth without overheating. Fires kept at a steady level. Rooms aired during daylight. Bedding changed when possible. Balance mattered. Extremes weakened the body. Moderation preserved it. As months passed, your sense of smell might become sharper. You would notice spoiled food sooner, stagnant air more clearly. Survivors often developed heightened awareness, though they never named it as such. The body adapted to danger by refining perception. When travel became necessary, you would move cautiously, avoiding crowded inns, choosing daylight hours, carrying your own cup, your own utensils. These small choices reduced risk. Independence became protection. You might meet others like yourself, survivors marked not by scars, but by calm eyes and measured speech. Conversations were brief but meaningful. There was no need for excess words. Shared understanding replaced explanation. Trust would be rare, but not absent. You would learn to recognize it slowly, through consistency, through someone keeping distance without offense, through someone respecting your boundaries. Trust, like health, returned gradually. At night, the stars seemed brighter than before. Fewer fires, fewer lamps, fewer cities glowing against the sky. You might lie back and look up, breathing evenly, feeling small but steady. The sky reminded you that life continued beyond any single catastrophe. As the worst of the plague loosened its grip, survival shifted again. It became about rebuilding, about choosing which parts of the old world to bring forward, and which to leave behind. You would carry with you the habits that saved you: cleanliness, patience, restraint. Fear would not vanish entirely. It would linger, softened, like a scar that no longer hurts unless touched, but it would also serve as a guide. A reminder to stay attentive, to respect the balance between connection and caution. In this quieter world, sleep came more easily. Exhaustion was honest now, earned through careful work rather than frantic motion. You would lie down knowing that you had done what you could for the day, and that was enough. Breathing slowly, you would feel gratitude without ceremony, for warmth, for food, for another dawn ahead. Survival had taught you that gratitude did not need grand expression. It lived quietly in the body, in the absence of pain, in the presence of rest, and so life continued. Not untouched by loss, but not ended by it. You lived because you adapted, because you observed, because you rested when rest was needed, and acted only when action truly mattered. The plague became a chapter others would write about later, but for you it was simply a long season you moved through one careful day at a time. As years passed, the memory of constant danger softened into something distant, like a dream recalled only in fragments. You would still remember the caution it taught you, but the sharpness faded. Survival left behind wisdom more than fear. You no longer rushed toward anything, not even good news. You let events arrive at their own pace. The land itself seemed to breathe again. Grass grew tall where roads once carried heavy traffic. Fields returned slowly to use, tended by fewer hands but with greater care. You would work the soil deliberately, understanding now that exhaustion was an enemy. Short days of steady labor were better than long days of strain. Your home, once a place of shelter, became a place of quiet confidence. Every object had its place. Every corner held familiarity. You knew how the floor creaked, how the door sounded when closed properly. These small details created comfort. Familiarity, more than luxury, defined safety. You might notice how your senses remained alert without effort. A sudden cough in the distance still caught your attention. A change in smell still made you pause. But these reactions no longer brought panic. They brought awareness. Awareness allowed choice, and choice allowed survival. When travelers returned to the roads in greater numbers, you would observe them from a distance at first. Some had forgotten the lessons of restraint, eager to gather, to celebrate survival loudly. Others moved as you did, quietly, carefully, carrying their habits like invisible armor. You might share a meal with another survivor one evening, sitting across a small table, both of you keeping respectful distance without speaking of it. The conversation would drift slowly. Weather, crops, the condition of the road ahead, nothing rushed, nothing forced. Children born after the worst years would grow up hearing stories not meant to frighten them, but to guide them. Stories about washing hands before eating, about resting when ill, about choosing space over crowds. These lessons would pass down quietly, woven into daily life rather than taught as rules. You would notice how the body aged differently after hardship, stronger joints from steady movement, calmer breath from years of measured living. Survival reshaped not only habits, but posture, speech, and thought. At times, when alone, you might reflect on how survival had little to do with luck and more to do with listening to the body, to the environment, to instinct. Those who listened survived more often than those who ignored subtle warnings. The nights grew gentler. No more bells ringing endlessly. No more whispers of entire towns gone silent. Instead, the sounds of life returned gradually. Footsteps, distant laughter, the occasional song drifting through the air. Still, you kept your routines. Windows opened for fresh air. Bedding aired in sunlight. Meals cooked thoroughly. These habits had become part of who you were, no longer conscious decisions. Survival had turned into lifestyle. You would sometimes wonder how future generations might live without these memories, whether they would forget how fragile life could be, whether they would rush again into crowds without thought. You could not control that. You could only live by what you had learned. And so you lived. Slowly, carefully, fully. When you lay down at night, sleep came like a tide, steady and reliable. You breathed in, breathed out. The world no longer felt hostile. It felt manageable. Survival, you understood now, was never about escaping danger entirely. It was about moving through it without losing yourself. And in that understanding, rest became deep, unbroken, and kind. Time continued its quiet work, smoothing the sharp edges of memory. You no longer woke each morning expecting loss. Instead, you woke with an understanding that life was fragile but persistent, like grass growing between stones. That understanding did not weigh heavily. It rested lightly in the background, shaping choices without demanding attention. Your days found a gentle balance between effort and rest. You worked when the light was good and stopped when fatigue crept in. You learned that pushing beyond tiredness brought no reward. The body, when respected, gave back strength willingly. This lesson stayed with you longer than fear ever could. The community around you, smaller than before, grew closer in quieter ways. People spoke less but listened more. When someone fell ill, early signs were noticed quickly. Care was offered with caution, wisdom guiding compassion. Distance was no longer seen as coldness but as care expressed thoughtfully. You noticed that laughter returned slowly. Not the loud, careless laughter of earlier years, but a softer sound, shared between few people at a time. It carried warmth without drawing attention. Joy had become something private and precious. As seasons turned again, you felt gratitude for ordinary things. Clean water, dry clothing, a well-tended fire. Gratitude no longer needed celebration. It lived in small moments, like warmth spreading through the chest while sipping a simple broth. Travel resumed in measured ways. You might walk to nearby villages, carrying your own supplies, staying alert but calm. You chose your paths carefully, favoring open spaces and daylight. The world had taught you how to move through it gently. At times, you would pass through places still bearing marks of loss. Empty houses, overgrown gardens. You did not linger. You honored them by continuing on, living carefully in a world that had once paused. Sleep remained your greatest ally. You guarded it. Nights were kept quiet. Worries were set aside until morning. You trusted rest to repair what the day had worn down. Many who survived did so simply because they slept when sleep was needed. You noticed how breath anchored you. In moments of uncertainty, you returned to it, slow and steady. Breath had carried you through fear before. It would continue to do so. As you aged, you became a quiet example to others, not through stories of heroism, but through calm presence. Through routines that made sense. Through choices that favored balance. People noticed, even if they did not say so. You realized then that survival was not an event, but a way of living learned under pressure and carried forward into peace. The plague had passed, but its lessons remained, woven into your days. And each night, as you lay down, the world felt less threatening and more understandable. You closed your eyes knowing that you had learned how to live slowly, carefully, and fully. Sleep came easily and stayed. The world no longer rushed you, and you no longer rushed the world. This quiet agreement shaped every part of your life. You moved through your days with an ease that came from knowing what truly mattered and what could safely be left behind. Survival had refined your priorities until only the essential remained. Morning still began gently. You listened before rising, not out of fear but habit. The simple act of noticing, the wind against the walls, the faint sound of movement outside, grounded you. Awareness had become a form of comfort, a steady presence rather than a warning. You spent more time outdoors now, but always with intention. Open air felt restorative. You chose wide paths, fields where the horizon stretched freely, places where breath felt easy. Nature had always been there, but now you felt connected to it in a deeper way, as if survival had aligned your rhythm with its own. Meals were slow and deliberate. You ate without distraction, tasting warmth and texture, allowing the body to receive nourishment fully. Hunger was no longer urgent. It was simply a signal, answered calmly. This gentleness toward yourself was one of the quiet gifts survival left behind. You noticed how emotions passed more smoothly than before. Fear arose less often, and when it did, it moved through without staying. Sadness came and went. Peace stayed longer. Living through uncertainty had taught you that no feeling needed to be resisted. Everything passed in its own time. People sometimes sought your presence without knowing why. They felt steadied around you. You spoke softly, paused often, chose words carefully. Silence no longer felt empty. It felt complete. In a world relearning how to live, calm was contagious. At night the air felt cleaner than it once had. Fewer fires burned unnecessarily. Fewer crowds stirred dust and noise. You opened your window slightly, letting cool air move across the room. Fresh air had always mattered, even when no one could explain it. Sleep deepened with age. Dreams softened. They were no longer crowded with images of loss, but filled with familiar places, gentle movement, open skies. When you woke, you carried none of the dream's weight, only a sense of rest. The plague became a story others told. You listened without interruption. You did not correct details or add drama. You understood that every generation reshaped memory to fit its needs. What mattered was that life continued, guided quietly by lessons learned. You sometimes wondered how close danger still was, hidden beneath everyday life. That awareness did not trouble you. It simply reminded you to stay kind, measured, and attentive. Survival had taught you respect for unseen forces. As evening settled again, you prepared for rest as you always had. Fire checked. Door secured, body relaxed, breath steady. These rituals were not born of fear but of care. You lay down knowing that survival had not hardened you. It had softened you, slowed you, and made you attentive to the fragile beauty of ordinary days. And as sleep arrived, gentle and certain, you rested not as someone who had escaped death, but as someone who had learned how to live. With time, even the word survival lost its sharpness. It became simply life, lived with care. You no longer measured days by what you avoided, but by what felt steady and right. The habits that once protected you now felt natural, like breathing without thinking. The mornings were often cool and quiet. Mist lingered low over the ground, and you would move through it slowly, letting it brush against your clothes. There was comfort in moving at this pace, in knowing there was no need to hurry. Haste had once brought danger. Slowness had brought safety. You found yourself noticing small details more often. The way light rested on a wooden table. The sound of water poured into a cup. The rhythm of your own footsteps. These moments anchored you in the present, where fear had little space to grow. If illness appeared anywhere nearby, it no longer sent a wave of panic through the community. People responded with calm awareness. Space was given. Rest was encouraged. Cleanliness was practiced without fuss. The lessons of the past had settled deeply, shaping behavior without the need for reminders. You sometimes walked beyond familiar paths, not far, but far enough to feel change. New growth covered old scars. Nature reclaimed what had been left behind. This quiet renewal mirrored your own. You were no longer the person you had been before the plague, but you were not diminished, you were reshaped. When night came, it arrived gently. You dimmed the light, closed the day, and allowed thoughts to slow. Reflection no longer spiraled into worry. It settled into acceptance. What had happened could not be changed. What remained could be cared for. Breath guided you again. In and out. Steady. Reliable. It had always been there, even when the world felt uncertain. Now it carried calm rather than urgency. As sleep took hold, there was no fear of tomorrow. Only the quiet trust that you would wake, as you had many times before, and continue slowly, carefully, peacefully. Life moved on and you moved with it. The years that followed felt less like a return to normal and more like the discovery of a new rhythm. You did not search for the life that had existed before. You allowed a different one to grow in its place. This life was quieter, but it was also steadier, built on attention rather than urgency. You learned to begin each day without expectation. The morning did not owe you anything. You accepted whatever it brought, clear skies, light rain, cool air, and adjusted without resistance. This flexibility had once been survival, now it was peace. Your hands remembered useful things, how to knot rope securely, how to sharpen a blade without rushing, how to fold cloth so it lasted longer. These skills connected you to the present moment. When your hands were occupied, your thoughts rested. You noticed that people who had lived through the plague shared a similar calm. Not joyless, not fearful, simply grounded. They moved deliberately. They spoke only when there was something worth saying. Their presence felt like still water, reflecting rather than disturbing. Sometimes, as you worked or rested, a memory would surface without warning. A face, a voice, a street once filled with sound. You let the memory pass through you without clinging to it. Grief no longer demanded attention. It had softened into understanding. The land continued to heal. Forests crept back toward abandoned spaces. Wild flowers filled places where buildings had fallen. You walked through these areas with respect, aware that nature did not hurry to replace what was lost. It grew patiently, one season at a time. You learned to trust seasons again. Winter no longer felt threatening, only still. Spring no longer felt reckless, only renewing. Summer brought warmth without excess. Autumn reminded you gently of letting go. Each season carried lessons you no longer ignored. Meals remained simple. You found comfort in repetition, familiar flavors, familiar warmth. Eating was no longer about filling space, but about sustaining the body quietly. You stopped eating when satisfied, not when full. This attentiveness kept you strong without effort. Evenings became your favorite time. The world softened then. Light faded slowly. Shadows lengthened. You moved less, listened more. Evening invited reflection without demanding it. You often sat quietly, doing nothing at all. Once, this would have felt wasteful. Now it felt necessary. Stillness allowed the nervous energy of the day to settle. In stillness, the body repaired itself. Sleep came naturally when invited. You did not force it. You prepared for it gently, dimming light, loosening muscles, slowing breath. You trusted sleep as a companion, not something to chase. Dreams sometimes carried fragments of old fears, but they no longer startled you awake. Even fear had grown tired. It drifted through and dissolved. You woke rested more often than not. The body, given consistency, responded with balance. This was one of survival's quiet gifts, learning how to cooperate with yourself. Over time, you noticed that your presence affected spaces. Rooms felt calmer when you entered, conversations slowed. People felt less compelled to rush or prove anything. You did not intend this, it happened naturally, shaped by how you lived. The world continued to change, but change no longer felt threatening. You understood now that everything changed always had. Survival had simply made that truth visible. As the night deepened once more, you lay down with a sense of gentle completeness. Nothing needed fixing. Nothing needed deciding. You were allowed to rest exactly as you were. Breath slowed. Muscles softened. Thoughts drifted like clouds across a wide, quiet sky. And sleep came not suddenly, not dramatically, but gradually, kindly, carrying you onward into deep, peaceful rest, where the world required nothing of you at all. In the deepest hours before dawn, the world felt suspended, balanced between what had been and what was still becoming. You rested within that quiet balance, unaware of time passing, aware only of breath rising and falling. This gentle rhythm had accompanied you through uncertainty once, and now it guided you into peace. When you stirred, it was not from worry, but from comfort. The body shifted naturally, finding ease. Outside, the air was cool and still. Nothing demanded attention. Nothing waited urgently. The world had learned patience, and so had you. As days continued to unfold, you found yourself less concerned with outcomes and more attuned to process. How something was done mattered more than what was achieved. Careful steps mattered more than distance covered. This understanding softened effort and removed strain from even necessary labor. You noticed how rarely you hurried now. Even when tasks were many, you approached them one at a time. This focus made work lighter, the mind did not scatter. Energy was conserved without conscious effort. You sometimes paused simply to stand quietly, feeling the ground beneath your feet. This grounding reassured you. The earth had endured far worse than any single event, and yet it continued to support life. That knowledge settled deeply, lending strength without tension. Voices in the world around you remained gentle. People spoke in measured tones, unconsciously mirroring one another. The chaos of earlier times felt distant, like a storm that had passed beyond the horizon. You learned to trust silence again. Silence no longer meant absence or danger. It meant space, room to breathe, room to recover, room to exist without pressure. In silence, the body relaxed more completely than words ever allowed. As evening approached once more, familiar rituals returned. A simple meal. A small fire. A final check of doors and windows. These acts no longer came from fear. They came from respect for rest. When you lay down, the world seemed to recede gently, like water pulling back from the shore. Thoughts slowed. Muscles released. The day dissolved without resistance. Survival had once required attention. Now it required only presence. And as sleep gathered you again, deep and untroubled, you rested within a world that no longer asked you to endure, only to be. Time no longer pressed against you. Days flowed one into another without sudden interruption, measured only by the slow movement of light across walls and the quiet sounds of the world beyond. You moved with this rhythm naturally, no longer forced by circumstance but shaped by it. Every step, every breath, every small action felt deliberate without effort. You noticed details you might once have ignored. The faint warmth of sunlight touching a wooden beam. The soft vibration of a bird landing lightly on a branch. The subtle shifts in wind as it passed over fields and through open windows. These small observations grounded you, reminding you of the stability beneath change. Evening came quietly, not as a signal of fatigue or fear, but as an invitation to stillness. You allowed your body to settle into familiar routines. Fire tended just enough to warm and comfort, not to dominate. Cloth folded neatly. Utensils cleaned and stored. These small acts became meditative, each motion steadying the mind and anchoring the heart. As you moved through these motions, you felt a profound patience take root. The urge to rush, to fill empty moments with unnecessary activity, had faded long ago. You understood now that presence itself, slow, deliberate, calm, was the truest measure of endurance. Those who survived had learned this lesson, and now without thinking you embodied it. When night arrived fully, the air cooled, but you did not resist it. You welcomed it, letting the quiet darkness wash over your senses. You noticed how the silence held layers of life. The soft hum of insects, the distant call of an owl, the whisper of wind over leaves. Each sound was a reminder that you were not alone, yet you were safe. Your breathing slowed naturally, drawing you toward the deepest sleep yet. No urgency, no fear. Only the steady, unwavering rhythm of in and out, in and out. You felt your body sink deeper into the mattress, each muscle releasing tension it had carried without awareness. Thoughts drifted past like slow-moving clouds. Some were memories, faint and distant, no longer sharp. Others were simple observations, fleeting and gentle. The warmth of sunlight, the smell of bread baking, the sound of water moving over stone. You allowed each thought to pass without grasping, simply noticing and letting go. Time blurred. The world outside mattered less. You existed fully in this moment, carried by breath, carried by calm, carried by the quiet knowledge that life had persisted, and that you persisted within it. And as you sank further into sleep, the rhythm of your body and the rhythm of the world became one, safe, steady, unbroken. The night stretched long and quiet. You felt neither hurry nor strain, only the soft, steady passage of time that allowed the body and mind to rest in tandem. Your awareness had shifted. You noticed subtleties that once escaped attention. The gentle sway of a branch against a window, the faint rustle of leaves as the wind moved over the distant fields, the quiet murmur of water in a trough nearby. These small sounds became companions, comforting and predictable, grounding you in the present. Each day, as sunlight crept across the room, you rose slowly, deliberately, letting limbs stretch without effort. Movement was careful and measured, informed by memory of past hardships, yet softened by the calm of survival. No action was rushed. No moment wasted. Tasks were attended to in the order they naturally arose: tending a small fire, drawing fresh water, checking stored provisions, brushing cloth clean, preparing a simple meal. Each small act became an anchor, a rhythm guiding you through the gentle unfolding of the day. You walked often, not far, but enough to notice life resuming around you. Fields slowly recovered from neglect, wildflowers sprouting in places once overgrown with weeds. Birds returned to empty rooftops, their songs quiet but persistent, each note a sign of continuity. Occasionally, a neighbor appeared, moving with the same calm attention. Greetings were exchanged softly, words sparse but meaningful. Distance was respected naturally, instinctively, a habit ingrained through seasons of caution. Food remained simple and sustaining. Warm broths, lightly roasted grains, vegetables from carefully tended soil. You ate slowly, tasting texture and temperature, allowing nourishment to enter body and mind without distraction. Each meal was a ritual, performed with calm awareness rather than urgency, a quiet recognition of what it meant to be alive. You found yourself reflecting on time differently now. Hours and days were no longer measured by busy events or obligations but by natural rhythms: light and shadow, warmth and cool, waking and sleeping. The mind, freed from constant worry, became spacious. Thoughts moved gently, sometimes lingering, sometimes passing without insistence. You learned to watch them without attachment, allowing them to drift like clouds over a silent meadow. As evening approached, the world softened. Shadows lengthened, air cooled, and a gentle hush seemed to settle over everything. Fires were kept low, not to illuminate but to provide comfort. Windows were closed or opened just slightly to admit the night's freshness without chill. The same routines you had followed for months, and now years, carried a reassuring consistency. These acts, once purely functional, now became meditative, marking the boundary between day and night, activity and rest. You prepared for sleep with a deliberate calm. Muscles loosened, clothing adjusted for warmth and comfort, blankets arranged just so. Breath became the center of attention, in and out, steady and slow. Thoughts were noticed and released. The body sank deeper into the mattress, releasing tension that you had carried without knowing it. Sometimes distant sounds punctuated the night: a soft owl's call, a rustling leaf, the far-off clatter of tools being put away. You welcomed each as a quiet reminder of life moving slowly around you, never threatening, always steady. Awareness existed without urgency, observation without worry. This presence, patient, calm, deliberate, had become your protection, your comfort, your constant companion. The memory of fear and loss lingered only as a shadow, never sharp, never urgent. You understood now that survival had not been about heroic acts or knowledge alone. It had been about attention, noticing, responding, adapting, respecting limits, in yourself, in others, in the world. The body, the mind, and the quiet environment around you had formed a delicate balance, and by moving gently within it you endured. Sleep deepened further, carrying you along without interruption. Each breath drew you closer to stillness. Each heartbeat harmonized with the subtle rhythm of night. You felt supported in ways that words cannot capture, held by patterns of calm learned slowly over years of attentiveness. The world beyond your walls existed, but you did not need to reach for it. It moved naturally, as you moved naturally with it. Thoughts faded almost entirely, leaving a sense of weightless presence. Time itself became indistinct. Moments and hours were irrelevant. You were suspended in a gentle, steady continuity, resting fully, deeply, without need for movement or concern. The body repaired, the mind restored. Peace prevailed, simple and unbroken. And as the night carried on, uninterrupted, every breath, every heartbeat, every quiet motion merged into one slow, seamless current. You were neither awake nor troubled. You were alive, sustained, calm. You were steady, fully present, and entirely at rest. The world outside moved slowly, almost imperceptibly. Trees swayed with gentle insistence, their leaves brushing against one another in a quiet, natural rhythm. Even the wind seemed to pass with deliberation, pausing over fields, over rooftops, over quiet streets. You moved within this rhythm as if it had always been yours, each step measured, each breath steady, each thought a soft current rather than a sharp spark. Your body felt accustomed to this pace. Limbs moved without resistance, muscles relaxed without strain. You had learned, through careful observation and countless small decisions, how to exist without overtaxing yourself. Every motion was efficient, every pause meaningful. Even the act of sitting or standing was deliberate, a dialogue between your body and the calm order of the world around you. Sunlight filtered through windows, brushing the floor with soft streaks of gold. Dust particles danced lazily in the beams, tiny motes of quiet life. You watched them for a moment, breathing in slowly, letting the world enter you gently. There was no rush. There had never been a need to rush. You had learned the value of patience, of stillness, of presence. Meals were taken slowly. Each bite was savored, each sip of warm liquid allowed to flow deliberately into the body. You noticed texture, temperature, and subtle flavor, experiencing nourishment, not only as sustenance, but as comfort. Food became a ritual, not out of necessity alone, but as a quiet celebration of the body's resilience, of the small pleasures that persisted even after loss. You sometimes walked through the village or the countryside, steps light and measured. Paths that had once felt dangerous or empty now carried quiet reassurance. Nature had reclaimed spaces abandoned in haste or fear. Grasses grew tall in forgotten fields. Wildflowers stretched their heads toward the sun. Birds called softly, returning to rooftops and branches. Even the air felt different, cleaner, steadier, filled with the gentle hum of life moving carefully but persistently. When you encountered others, the interactions were brief but meaningful. Words were measured, tone soft, distance respected. You had learned that closeness was not always kindness. Attention and care could exist without contact. These small gestures of awareness, repeated daily, had become as protective as walls or fire. They allowed connection without risk, warmth without danger, presence without pressure. Evenings were welcomed like a quiet friend. The sky dimmed slowly, casting long shadows across the land. Fires were tended, embers glowing steadily. Candles flickered softly, their light warming the room without overwhelming it. You moved among these familiar routines with ease, each small act a comfort, each measured motion a thread in the fabric of a safe and deliberate life. When you lay down at night, the air around you cool but not harsh, blankets wrapped just so. You felt the steady pulse of existence beneath you. Breath moved in and out, slow, reliable, comforting, heartbeat synchronized with that of the world beyond. You were part of a rhythm larger than yourself, and yet completely contained within your own calm body. Thoughts, when they appeared, were fleeting and gentle. Images of the past, houses, streets, distant voices, drifted lightly, never heavy, never urgent. Memory existed as soft observation, not as demand. The mind no longer needed to grasp or resist. It flowed with the body, with the air, with the night. Muscles loosened completely. Eyes closed fully, lids resting heavy and soft. Every nerve, every cell settled into rest. The world outside continued quiet and patient, and you existed entirely within the gentle current of its slow movement. Even the faintest sounds, a distant owl, rustling leaves, soft wind, became companions rather than distractions. Awareness was no longer sharp, it was broad and soft. You were part of the rhythm, yet distinct, resting entirely within it. Every breath reinforced calm, every heartbeat carried reassurance, every exhale released tension. Time ceased to matter. There was no hurry, no expectation, no demand. The past existed as memory, the future as quiet possibility, the present as infinite and safe. You were carried fully by it. You were supported, grounded, calm. And so the night stretched onward, seamless and unbroken, a gentle current flowing through body, mind, and spirit. You were neither alert nor asleep, you were simply held. Held by rhythm, by breath, by the careful continuation of life itself. The world was steady. You were steady. And sleep, deep and complete, carried you further, ever further, into rest. The night deepened, and the world seemed to hold its breath. Even the air felt thick with quiet, soft as velvet against your skin. You lay still, letting your body sink fully into the surface beneath you, letting gravity do its work without resistance. Each part of you relaxed in turn, from the tips of your toes to the crown of your head. Muscles released tension without thought. Joints softened. Breath lengthened and deepened naturally, unforced, steady, and even. Outside, the faintest sounds moved through the night. Barely audible but comforting. The gentle rustle of leaves in a distant tree, the soft sigh of a stream winding its way over stones, the occasional wing beat of a bird gliding silently through the dark. These sounds were neither startling nor intrusive. They became a background hum, a gentle reminder that life continued quietly, calmly, patiently. Time no longer existed in measurable units. Minutes and hours dissolved. The past felt distant, harmless, a series of faint images you watched without attachment. The future felt like a soft horizon, undefined, waiting for you gently, without urgency. All that remained was the present. The slow rise and fall of your chest, the warmth of the blankets, the subtle support of the mattress beneath you, the quiet rhythm of the world moving alongside you. Your body had learned the language of stillness. Each muscle responded to relaxation as naturally as the heart responded to its own beat. Even your mind, trained for vigilance during the harsh seasons before, now learned that safety was abundant, that nothing demanded frantic attention, that calm was sufficient and enough. Thoughts drifted in, soft and brief, then drifted out again, as clouds passing over a vast, serene sky. You might imagine yourself moving through familiar spaces, walking slowly across empty fields where sunlight had once warmed the grass. Each step was deliberate, soft against the earth. There were no crowds, no noise, no danger, only the gentle pulse of life in motion. Even as you imagined these movements, your body remained perfectly still, anchored, relaxed, supported by blankets. And bed, held by the slow, steady rhythm of your own breathing. Night stretched long and deep. You were aware, but not alert. Present, but not thinking. You existed fully within a quiet continuum, a world defined not by action or reaction, but by gentle perception. Every sound, every movement, every touch of air across your skin was absorbed calmly, consciously, but without effort. Occasionally, memories drifted near. Faces of people, quiet streets, small acts of survival you had performed long ago. These images were not sharp or urgent. They were like soft waves lapping at the edge of consciousness. You observed them, allowed them to pass, and returned immediately to the steady, comforting rhythm of breath and bodily presence. The senses, once honed for vigilance, now attuned themselves to comfort and observation. Every inhalation carried a sense of safety. Every exhalation released tension and lingering worry. Your heartbeat matched the quiet pulse of the world outside, slow, even, unhurried. You felt your place within it without effort. You were both still and connected, safe and aware, calm and complete. As hours passed, the boundary between waking and sleep blurred. Your thoughts dissolved entirely. Only the rise and fall of breath remained. Only the quiet, steady awareness of your body. Only the knowledge, deep and unspoken, that you were supported, that you were safe, that you were exactly where you needed to be. Dreams might arrive, but they came softly, like mist over a still lake. They did not disturb or alarm. They flowed around you, carrying images of open skies, gentle rivers, quiet forests, soft sunlight on calm fields. You moved through these dreams without effort, without tension, simply observing, floating, being. Time ceased entirely. The mind and body merged into the slow rhythm of existence itself. Each breath was a wave, each heartbeat a tide. The world moved around you without pressure, without urgency, and you moved with it, effortlessly, gently, completely. Even the faintest external sounds, wind through trees, the distant call of an owl, a branch brushing lightly, were absorbed, acknowledged, and folded into the steady current of awareness. Nothing startled, Nothing demanded response. Only calm persisted, only presence, only quiet, unbroken continuity. You could imagine the sky stretching infinitely, vast and open, holding all moments at once. Above it, clouds drifted slowly, lightly, carrying fragments of memory, fragments of sound, fragments of life, but never urgency, never alarm. Below, the earth cradled you completely. You were suspended in a seamless, unbroken balance of rest and awareness, safety and observation. The body released its last tension. Muscles, nerves, joints, every small fiber of being surrendered completely. Breath continued steady and deep, slow and deliberate. Heartbeat aligned with the world's pulse. Mind emptied gently, fully, allowing the body to exist entirely in this safe, quiet, restorative state. You were neither awake nor simply asleep. You were fully held within calm, fully carried by the rhythm of night, fully immersed in presence. Every part of you, mind, body, heart, awareness, rested in harmony. Nothing rushed, nothing demanded, nothing pressed. Only slow, steady, gentle being. And so the night stretched on, seamless, endless, unbroken. You existed fully within it, sinking deeper, drifting further, resting completely, carried entirely into the most profound, peaceful, and restorative sleep. The night moved slowly, unhurried, as if time itself had paused to watch you rest. Outside, shadows shifted gently under the soft glow of the moon, painting quiet patterns across the land. The world was vast and calm, and you felt your body settling into the same steady rhythm. Muscles loosened completely. Breathing deepened, rising and falling like the tide over a quiet shore. You imagined the landscape beyond your home. Empty streets where once people hurried, now softened by grass and moss. Stone walls standing steady, unbroken, holding memories of those who had come before. Trees leaning lightly in the night breeze, their leaves whispering faintly. Even in this quiet, life persisted, slow and gentle, just as you did. Your awareness was soft but full. You noticed the subtle differences in air temperature as it moved across the room. You felt the gentle weight of blankets resting over your limbs. You sensed the mattress supporting every contour of your body, holding you without effort. There was nothing to adjust, nothing to worry over, only the gentle certainty that you were safe. Memories of past seasons drifted through the edges of thought. Images of distant fields, small fires burning in hearths, hands tending animals or crops. Faces of people who had passed through your life quietly, leaving traces of laughter, sadness, resilience. These recollections did not disturb. They floated past like leaves on a slow stream, soft and unobtrusive, absorbed into the calm current of your awareness. You imagined the slow routines of those who had lived through difficult times, people who survived by observing, resting, pacing themselves, listening to the rhythm of the world. You understood instinctively that these habits, stillness, awareness, measured movement, were not just survival strategies but gifts of patience and presence. You felt them in yourself now, ingrained, steady, natural. Night stretched endlessly. Sounds moved quietly around you, a distant stream flowing over rocks, a single branch brushing the wall, the faint hum of insects far away. These sounds no longer startled. They were companions marking a gentle, consistent world. Each note became part of a larger rhythm, a melody of calm and continuity. Your breath continued slow and deep. Inhaling brought warmth and awareness. Exhaling released tension, worry, and the faint echoes of memory. With each cycle, your body sank further into comfort. Your heart beat steadily, a soft drum in sync with the world, reinforcing calm, reassuring presence. You might imagine walking slowly along quiet streets, past empty squares and shuttered doors. The air smelled faintly of earth and wood smoke, of clean grass and distant water. You felt the ground beneath your feet, solid and reassuring, every step measured and deliberate. Each movement required no effort, only observation. You were part of the world, yet entirely safe within it. Even the faintest details became meaningful. The way moonlight touched the corner of a stone wall, the shimmer of dew on grass, the rustle of a small animal passing unnoticed in the distance. These subtle things became a steady rhythm, a gentle reminder that life persisted quietly, carefully, beautifully. Sleep drew closer, deeper, softening the edges of thought until all that remained was the sensation of existence itself. You were aware, but not alert. You were present, but not active. You were part of the night, and the night part of you. Every breath, every heartbeat, every subtle movement of your body was absorbed fully into the slow current of life. The boundaries between body, mind, and environment began to dissolve. You existed simply as presence, breathing, feeling, resting, immersed in calm. Even awareness of time faded completely. The world had no urgency, you had no urgency. Only quiet continuity prevailed. And in this continuity, your body sank fully into comfort. Every fiber, every joint, every nerve, every cell surrendered into rest. The world outside was steady and patient. The air moved softly, carrying the faint scent of night and earth. The body and mind aligned with it perfectly, seamlessly, without effort. You drifted further, deeper. The rhythm of breath carried you onward. Muscles, nerves, and thoughts softened completely. Awareness persisted, gentle and calm but without resistance. You were fully supported, fully held, fully immersed in slow, unbroken presence. The night stretched like a vast ocean, carrying you effortlessly across its gentle currents. You floated within it, neither awake nor simply asleep, completely embraced by calm. Every inhalation reinforced safety. Every exhalation released tension. Every heartbeat synchronized with the quiet pulse of the world. And as sleep carried you further still, deep and restorative, the mind emptied completely, leaving only presence, only rhythm, only the soft, infinite comfort of being fully supported, fully safe, fully at rest.